Hi, I'm Rick.
Hi, I'm Steven. Today we're going to talk about Azure Pipelines and how you can use them to deploy to Azure.
For a YAML introduction, check out our other video.
So Rick, today we're going to talk about how we can deploy something to Azure.
Yes.
And we're going to use the YAML structure that we use to building applications to also deploy applications to Azure. So let's take a look at my screen.
Show me the good stuff, Steven.
So we have this is our main pipeline. We have a demo application, which is a simple Blazor application, which hosts a client, server, and some shared code, and a test project, a unit test project in this case. So if you look at the application, you might immediately notice a few things, because we're using a template to structure our pipeline a little bit better.
All right.
This is not needed because you can put everything in one single pipeline, but it's easier if you use a structure, because it's easier to reuse certain parts of your code, and it reads a bit better.
So instead of a lot of code in one single file, you separate it in multiple files for reuse.
Yeah, so basically, if you look at my screen, you can see that I'm referencing to a template called application.build YAML. And if you go to my Solution Explorer here, you can see that I have that build project and the deployment project in the same directory, close to each other. Which is not needed, by the way. So if you want to, you can also reference a template in an entirely different repository. So if you want to, you can, for example, create a repository solely for your reusable templates.
Why would you do that?
Well, like I said, if you want to, if you have a very specific set of instructions you want to execute on a lot of pipelines or a lot of places, you can put that in a separate repository, so you can reuse it everywhere.
All right, so you have a repository especially for your YAML files, where you can maintain them and use them for all the other repositories.
Yeah, if you want to, or you can only put certain pieces of templates there if you want to. That's entirely up to you, but just know that if you want to, that possibility is definitely there.
And is it also that you can have YAML files in your project also in a separated repository, or is that not a no-go?
Yeah, if you want to, you can definitely do that. So
right.
It's entirely depends on how you want to set up your project. So
all right.
In this particular case, I've just added 3 separate YAML files in the same repository in a separate directory for easy use. So if you look further into our main pipeline file, you can see that the first step we do is we build our application, and after that we deploy our application 3 times. Once to our development environment, once to our staging environment, once to our production environment. And while we deploy that, we give a certain condition which needs to be met before it will actually do that.
Yes, and those environments, as a tester, I prefer the OTAP environments. Is this similar, the same, or how does that work?
Yeah, so nowadays in Azure, if you are talking about environments, you don't really talk about those classic environments anymore. So basically, if you want an environment, you create an environment. If you need an environment for your staging, you make an environment for your staging. But if you're working on a very large feature, which you want to test very thorough, or maybe for a long period, you can definitely just, for that single feature, create an environment. And if you're done, just clean it up.
So for example, you have a branch, the developer does some coding magic on it, and I can make a different environment where I specifically can test the things I want on it.
Yeah, definitely. So
that's your test environment.
Yeah, that's basically, it's entirely up to your organization how you want to implement that. Yeah. If you want to, you can still do it the old-fashioned way, but definitely know that if you want to, you can do deployments to environments on the go. So you can make as much environments as you want. In the end, your only restriction is how much it will cost, and that also depends on how long those environments will be up and running.
Yes, but there will be also mechanisms to to check that if they're not too long up.
Yeah, so definitely there are plenty of options to maintain that. So if we dive deeper into our deployment pipeline, you can see that I'm using a few parameters to define on top, and one of the most important argument is the environment argument. So that will be passed along, as you can see in our setup here.
Yes.
So in this case, we pass along development. And what you can see here is that it will use that environment on a few places inside the deployment. And one of the major targets is inside the variable group. So the way I set this up is every variable group corresponds to the specific environment.
Okay.
So if you go to Azure DevOps, we have below pipelines, we have an environments page. And if we go to those environments, you can see that the same environments are available here that we saw in those pipelines.
All right. How does this work? All those environments? Is development, especially development, as it say so, or? Well,
in the end, this is basically just a logical, more of an administration page. So as soon as you add an environment in the pipeline, it automatically detects it and it adds them on this page. Mm-hmm. So there's no manual configuration you need to do. But if you want to, you can add a new environment here. So that's entirely up to you.
But it makes sense you choose logical names for it.
Yeah, of course, because in the end you always want to relate to what a specific environment is or what's happening on that environment. Yes. So if we focus on a specific environment, like the development environment, you can see here that we, in a quick overview, you can see what pipelines are deploying to that specific environment. So in this case, you can see that I've deployed the Betatalks Blazor app to that environment twice today. They all went good, and you can click on that line and you go to that specific deployment. So in that way, you have a very good administration about what's going on your environment.
Yes. And how do you configure this?
So like I said, it basically configures it itself. But if you want to, you can add it manually. But what the most important part is that you can also add restrictions to that environment. Yes. So in our case, if you go to, let me take a different environment, for example, the production environment, and we go to approval and checks. So here you can see that I've added some approval and checks. I've added approval that at least one of us needs to approve that release before it's going to that environment, in this case production. And I've also said, and this is a very important one for me, that I only want to allow pull pipelines from a specific branch. So if someone's working on a feature branch and by accident or something wants to deploy to production, it automatically gets blocked because it cannot do that.
You don't want any trouble on the production.
No, we definitely don't want to. So if we look at the other options we have, you can see that we have a few options to add approvals and checks. So you can ensure that it doesn't use during business hours. Yes. That it requires specific templates, or maybe even invoke a specific REST API or Azure function before it starts. And that way you have more control on what's going on in your environment.
Yeah. Sounds good. And you can also, as you mentioned, you need approval from person before it goes to production. It's a little bit similar as a pull request, where you need also approve from a tester. A tester can also give approve to deploy it to the production
Yeah. So basically, those pull requests are for your code. This is a way to control your environment and to ensure the quality of your environment is always up to code.
Yes, and it's always what the organization wants to work with.
Yeah. So it's definitely it's entirely up to your organization how you configure it and how you want to work with it. But know that those options are there.
All right. Perhaps you could show me how you add an extra environment.
Yeah. So one thing to know is that I've also added a library. Add a variable group.
Yes.
And you can see that those variable groups correspond to the same environment. And if you look at those variables, you can see that I've maintained here all the configuration you need for that specific environment. So in our case, the subscription and a shorthand for the environment. And you can also link this to your Azure Key Vault. Yep. So if you have secrets or something you don't want to put in here, you could put it in your Azure Key Vault and maintain them there.
Similar like KeyPass or something.
So let's see how you can add another environment. So the first thing I'm going to do is add another variable group. So let's say this is our awesome feature, and let me for a second copy the same configuration as, for example, development. So we have a subscription. Subscription. Oh, that's private. That's environment. We can fill that in ourselves, and let's make sure this is correctly there. So let's say this is awesome.
Yes, almost similar as the classic way.
Yeah, so those variable groups are from the classic apps. They're used interchangeably, so you can use the same variable groups if you want. You can make new ones. The way I set this up here is that it needs to be the same name as your environment, so it automatically detects that it's being used.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So if I save this, and then copy this, and we go to our code. So the only thing I need to do, if everything's going correctly, is duplicate our deployment and say that we want to go to an awesome feature. And because we do want to make sure that it only does the awesome feature, we can change the conditions so that it's only working for features from the awesome feature. So if I save this and check this in, added awesome feature environment. So while I'm pushing that, I'm going back to my branching. So I could have used, I could have created that branch from Visual Studio Code, but in this instance I'm going to create it from the portal. And as soon as I create it, pipeline will be triggered.
Just as you configured.
Yeah, so basically, so as you can see, we still have a main pipeline running because I checked this in on the main branch. But as it, let me just run it manually so we don't have to wait. Awesome feature. And run. So now you can see that it's starting a new pipeline deployment. So our first step is that it will be building the application. So it builds, tests, and publishes some artifacts. And then we'll go on to development. And after that, if everything goes correctly, it will go to awesome feature.
So on purpose, you can create a new environment and will be very flexible also for testing purposes if you need it, or for other purposes, of course.
Yeah, so as soon as you see there's a demand for a specific environment or a specific scenario, you can easily create it this way.
All right. Thank you for guiding us through the deployment. And thank you for watching, guys.
Yeah, thanks guys. Hope you enjoyed it.
Bye.
See ya.